Welcome back, DIVEBOMB IndyCar podcast, here to review the 109th running of the Indianapolis 500. Crazy Indianapolis 500 as always. So as we do every year for this episode, we've got an extended hour-and-a-half episode to review all the action. Obviously, I'm the only bit of a different background because, as I said a few weeks ago, I am away this week. I am joined by Archie as usual in a more familiar territory for him. And we are joined once again by James Scott, who's been a friend of the podcast during the off-season, but it is such a big event, we thought we need an extra man to handle this very difficult race, which we've got to review because there are so many. Well, being the longest race of the year, there's always going to be more moments for me to respond to, and obviously it is by far and away the biggest race of the year, which we need to recap. Hello listeners, it's Dan from the future here. Just a little disclaimer, we recorded this episode before the news came out that Marcus Ericsson, Carl Kirkwood and Callum Myler were effectively disqualified from the Indianapolis 500. We will have a brief recap of that at the end as we've come back in the future, but just bear in mind the majority of this episode was filmed before that news broke out. Shouldn't make too much of a difference. The race still played out how it was. But just a little disclaimer, just in case you were a bit confused. And as I'm sure you've all seen, it was Álex Palou victorious to take his 5th win in 6 races to start off 2025 and effectively define his legacy now as one of the IndyCar greats. He'd never won an over race, let alone the Indianapolis 500, and it was the only candle that anybody could hold against him that Palou hasn't won an over race. When he's now hacked that, he's now won the Indianapolis 500, and as I said, he will cement himself as an all-time great. A lot of people say you can't until you win an Indy 500, and Palou did exactly that in true Palou fashion. It was a very, very Palou drive. He was patient, but at the same time, he was decisive. He made the moves he needed to when he needed to, and you always felt he was sort of running top 5, top 3 the entire race, and you just knew that'd be Palou versus somebody else at the end, and it was a case of if he could get it done. And on this occasion, had a bit of a traffic help him, but that's not to take away from what was a really special drive and a driver who is now, as I said, cemented their legacy as an all-time IndyCar great.
I kind of feel like this is just the way it was destined to go this year. I mean, given obviously the unprecedented season that Palou's been having, it almost would have felt wrong if he didn't win the 500 and just continue that form into the 500. And obviously, he's certainly quashed that notion that he himself said that if his career was to end in 20 years without winning the Indy 500, that it would not be a success and that it would be incomplete. He'll never have to contemplate that again because, well, he won't have to contemplate that silly talk of the fact that he's supposedly not good on ovals either because, I mean, I feel like that was purely circumstantial that he didn't have an oval win to his name. And that was a matter of time. And obviously there's no better place to end that run than Indy. And as you say, Dan, I kind of feel like he did it in the most typical Palou fashion as well. I think early on in the race, he kind of played the percentages a bit. There was some slightly chaotic restarts where you had some massive gaggles of cars piling into turn 1. And I don't think he took too many risks, but kind of as it went on, you kind of saw that calculated aggression that he's so good at producing, really. He's so measured and so precise, as we always say, in what he does. And as the race went on, he did gamble that bit more and he looked on the back foot, but how kind of foolish we were to believe that because he had more of a fuel save than Ericsson and even Malukas as well, who stopped slightly earlier than Ericsson for his final stop. But it just looked like for the winning move, he kind of caught Ericsson napping a bit into turn 1. Unexpected, caught him off guard a bit. It was, again, that kind of decisiveness that we see from Palou, and I can't think of a more deserving winner.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when in that sort of middle, second 2/3 of the race, when he was sat behind Daly and Malukas, it felt like the Jaws theme music was playing. He just knew that he was going to pounce. It was almost a matter of when rather than if. And as I was just sat watching that, it's just prime for Palou. I mean, incidents to some of his perhaps strongest competitors throughout the day just meant that the strongest lead car, when we have like your most familiar faces in IndyCar towards the top of the field, Palou was the only one that was really there and with a shot of winning, and it just almost felt inevitable. And with Palou, it kind of always does. And he got the job done. And as you say, that date with Destiny to finally become an Indy 500 champion. I mean, the scenes of him whipping his gloves off and sprinting down the yard of bricks was pretty cool as well. yeah, it was a super performance, and I mean one that now really solidifies his place as one of the all-time IndyCar greats. But yeah, a very weird race, almost quite confusing. And in the end, as it always is, Palou was the winner.
It's interesting that you kind of mentioned those celebrations, because I don't think it really matters who wins. After Indy, it's always just, you find yourself getting pretty emotional if you don't have an allegiance, at least. Like, I know you guys have allegiances to specific drivers who have been heartbroken in the last 2 years, but it's kind of pretty tear-jerking almost, seeing those just unbridled emotions. I think initially with Palou, it was just, I mean, I guess those 3 words, yellow, 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 as the caution came out, are probably the finest 3 words he's heard in his life, the relief there. But I think, it's when he opened his visor and you could kind of see those crazy sort of willpower-like eyes, those teary eyes. He was screaming on the radio. He'd said, I think, after he won the Indy GP, that he was going to go crazy and he was going to make sure that the whole of Indiana knew that he was an Indy 500 winner. Kind of stuck to that word, went to the Pacers game afterwards.
Didn't fare out very well for him, did it?
I don't think he'll mind. But I think just... I think just the kind of sight of him sprinting down the front stretch. I know Newgarden's obviously had a very iconic celebration in the last couple of years, but I've always thought, like, I'd love to see a driver just try and like sprint a lap in celebration. I thought he was going to, but then he kind of chucked his gloves in the air, roared and embraced his team. I thought it was quite fitting, actually, that his dad was the first over the pit wall, along with Barry Wanzer, who you would say is kind of his racing father in many ways. And yeah, it was just a lovely moment, because Palou always says that it's down to the team that he looks so good on track, and obviously he is incredibly special himself, and his execution is like nothing we've really ever seen before. But yeah, he definitely went suitably crazy, and completely agree. I think this was the day where he elevated himself into that conversation with the greats, or beyond just being a great to being a legend of IndyCar. And I think it's pretty unprecedented that he's doing this in only his 6th year in the series, in a pretty stacked field of a lot of modern great drivers too.
So it would take Álex Palou approximately 16 minutes to do a full lap of IMS on foot. If anyone ever wants to do that. That's what I was researching. So if any driver wants to do it, it'll take you 16 minutes to do. It might delay your victory celebration a bit. But the other thing I was going to say is, I actually find it so annoying they yellowed it. Like, obviously you have to if the car's in the wall, but he was like 50 meters off the finish line, just like.
That's kind of what I meant. It was not very aesthetically pleasing, was it? The yellows came out.
He stopped behind 2 lap cars, and then under yellow was like, oh well, that's a bit of a underwhelming. Well, it wasn't underwhelming because he had it wrapped up by then anyway. But it was like, give the man his moment. Like,
yeah, and poor Will Buxton.
The line.
I feel for Will Buxton, because he had to have had this mega call lined up, and then all of a sudden he has to scream caution in the middle of it. It kind of, just ruined that a bit. But
I feel like Alexander Rossi as well, who's won, where because he finished the line about 2 miles an hour, he doesn't really feel the gratitude of it, because he was literally rolling across the line. I don't think Palou will quite feel the same way, because he had it won anyway. But I feel Rossi wants to win a 500 actually going full pelt across the line for comparison. So anyway, they obviously had to do it. It was just like, come on, you had 100 meters left. But yeah, I mean, it's obviously continues a great start to the year for Palou. And I know we probably don't want to talk championship too much, but his gap is now extended to 115 points. So he's now got well over 2 victories in his back pocket. I'm not sure he's going to really need them. So the championship's going to be over by about Toronto. So
we thought maybe the 3 in a row from 2023 was impressive, where he became the first IndyCar driver in over a decade to do that. He's done that now, like crowning that 3 in a row with an Indianapolis 500 win, and it's like, well, it was almost expected, and it's the same driver doing it twice in the space of 24 months. So impressive from Palou. But I guess with one winner, there's got to be 32 other losers. So we can start off maybe with like maybe a Marcus Ericsson, although I'm not sure how much I'm going to have to speak about what happened, because it was such a topsy-turvy race for Ericsson as well.
You rather feel like Marcus Ericsson had this race in his hands. He had the fuel advantage on Palou. He came out with the track position, and we knew it was difficult to pass. With those combinations, you felt like when Ericsson made his final stop, he really, really, really had it in the bag. So he's going to be obviously really frustrated. I think he'd actually be more frustrated than he was in 2023, because I feel like there he couldn't have really done much else. This one, he self-admittedly gave Palou that opportunity by opening up the inside with 14 to go. So I can't remember what award said. I think he said Ericsson choked it or something along those lines. And it's hard to feel like that he didn't, because it was all in Ericsson's hands, and it was him opening the door for Palou, which gave Palou the victory. And I was slightly surprised Ericsson couldn't get back past, but that maybe speaks to how difficult it was to overtake more than anything else. And it was a bit of a weird race for Ericsson, because he fell down the order after his first stop, and then through some ingenious strategy had managed to put himself back in that position. And then obviously just threw it away is probably a bit harsh, but again, as I said, it was in his hands, and the tiniest of mistakes ultimately cost him victory.
I mean, he said that it's going to keep him up at night, and he's going to be replaying it in his head. James, are you replaying it in your head?
I did wake up this morning feel a little bit like, yeah, that one will definitely sting for him, because it was like I almost wondered when it happened whether he was doing kind of anticipating that Palou would get past one of the RLL cars and then he'd be able to follow them through, because throughout the day Ericsson had really been struggling in traffic. I almost likened it a bit to Dixon last year, where he couldn't get past Canapino, and that probably cost Dixon a proper shot at winning last year's 500. And it was the same thing. I mean, he started the race really strong, went from 9th to 5th after the first opening sequence of mix of green and yellow running, and then after that first stop where his pit crew really pulled through, having the clear pit exit of courtesy qualified in 9th, which then meant that in terms of like where you want to be in the pit stops, they chose one with a clear pit out, which really helped. Got up to essentially 2nd, and then apparently just the rear of the car just got so loose and dropped all the way down into the mid-20s by the time the 2nd pit stop happened, and they managed to sort it. And then he joined Ryan Hunter-Reay on the strategy of pitting on lap 108, which meant that they could try and gamble and make it on 2 more stops when it looked like those front runners might have to splash and go or really hold back fuel to do it also on 2 more stops. And then but when Malukas and Palou pitted for the final time, they were 34 seconds behind Ericsson. That gap then went up to 38, which was all Ericsson needed to then actually take the lead. And yeah, it was some, as you say, Dan, almost ingenious strategy from the 28 crew to drag basically what was an unsalvageable day halfway through into something would have been really quite special. But then, yeah, just a small mishap costs so much at Indy. And it's like, we could be in a conversation here about how Ericsson's a 3-time Indianapolis 500 winner if less than a second's worth of race time had basically been flipped around. I mean, it'll probably take some comfort in how strong this year's month of May was compared to last year. After last year, where seemingly almost everything went wrong, and having to fight his way through with the penultimate run of the bump day shootout to being, finishing 0.6 off the win. It will sting for now, but I do think, overall it's been a much better year for Ericsson at Indy, and it was pretty dramatic, but almost didn't quite reach that ultimate conclusion. But as I say, just kind of hats off to the 28 crew for thinking up such a clever strategy that nearly worked so well for him and Ryan Hunter-Reay.
I mean, Dan, we spoke a lot on the preview about how a lot of the drivers on media day were saying it's a long race. It's a long race. And I feel like Ericsson was kind of the epitome of that, kind of the peaks and troughs that you can have within the 500 miles, really, because he had a mega start to get himself up into the top 5. And then, obviously, as you say, James, just dropped right down. And then ultimately should probably have won the race because he was in the best position and on a much better fuel strategy. And yeah, I guess he was just compromised in the end by not being able to pass that traffic, because Palou was able to save fuel while Ericsson probably had the better pace because he was able to push flat out, but he just couldn't get around. And ultimately, I think he was, as I said, caught napping by Palou, really. I think it probably shouldn't have passed him at that point. I think caught everyone off guard and everyone by surprise. And I'm not going to say Ericsson wasn't concentrating, but he just didn't expect it. And he didn't do anything really to defend against it. And there were a couple of times where it looked like he could have a run on Palou, but he just never really got close enough even to kind of take a risk, it felt like. And yeah, ultimately left to rue that. I mean, he was obviously gutted. I always have this kind of thought, like, is the fact that he's won an Indy 500, does that soften the blow at all? But then you look specifically in Ericsson's case, and he will look at it as though he could be in an elite club of having 3 Indy 500s, really.
Now, I would say rounding out the podium, but it isn't actually a podium. So rounding up the top 3 was David Malukas, who it was actually a good day for Foyt because they've had a terrible start to the season, but they ended up with 3rd and 7th, which is much better, much more from what we expect out of them. And pretty good day for David Malukas because there was a long period where we thought he would really be in the mix for the win. It was sort of him, Daly, and Palou were the 3 contenders for a long period of time, and Hunter Ray sort of got in the mix as well. So it was a really good performance from Malukas. Obviously qualified decently last week, and a lot of others around him sort of fell for their own reasons. You know, Schwartzman, for example, Sato, for example, but he didn't really have any such problems. And yeah, really thought he was in the mix. Drove quite well all day long, but it was clearly quite difficult to overtake in traffic. And once you sort of got your position, it's 10 laps into a stint where the marbles are built up on the outside, you don't have a chance of overtaking somebody. So once you sort of got into 3rd and there was no more caution or no more pit stop cycles, he was just going to be stuck there. So, which is a shame because again, he was better on fuel than Palou as well. So there was a chance there for him, but didn't quite work out.
I mean, Foyt had a real couple of bullets in the race. I know Ferrucci obviously had such a tough month with, all of these comments about he's had to tear the car up and down about 8 different times to figure it out. For him to preserve that, I think it's 7 from 7 now in the top 10, which is pretty impressive. But yeah, Malukas, I know obviously he's had the very impressive drives at Gateway. This is certainly his best ever career race, not at Gateway. Very, very impressive. I think he pretty much had the same race as Palou, really, I would say. He just ultimately, as you say, Dan, couldn't make those decisive passes. Palou also made a very decisive pass on Malukas, very timely. I think that was actually before Ericsson stopped, even possibly. So that was kind of what probably put Malukas out of contention. To be in any contention, really, in those last 20 laps, it looked like you had to be in the top 2. Just moves look very hard to make. But I think there's a wider story with Malukas that, this time last year, he was part of the IndyCar social media content team, not knowing whether he'd be back racing because his wrist was in tatters after the injury suffered that obviously saw him sidelined before ever getting to drive for Aaron McLaren and ultimately losing his seat there. So to be here within a year, having not known what direction his career was going to go in, whether he would race again, whether he'd be able to race again, or at least whether he'd get any opportunities to race again. Obviously, he got the lifeline with Maya Shank last year, but this opportunity with Foyt, it's not panned out great so far this season, but this feels like a bit of a breakthrough. But I just think it's a big story of resilience, really, from Malukas. And kind of the fact that he's up there just shows not how random the race is, because we know he's a very skilled driver on ovals, but I don't think anyone comes into the month thinking, at one point in the race, your 1-2s, Connor Daly and David Malukas. So it's a phenomenal drive, very impressive. And I think it kind of just reaffirms the kind of, people obviously bandying his name around with Penske, and that's seemingly the reason why he's with AJ Foyt Racing. I think that just reaffirms that faith that they're putting in him and that potential as well.
I think he used the word bittersweet after the Indy 500 because obviously, he said as well that he was in tears on the cool down lap, and it's one of those things where had it been any other race, 3rd place, Malukas is going home with a trophy, a very decent haul of points, and reasonable satisfaction that it's comfortably his best result of the year. But because it's Indy, it's so different, it clearly, and it always has meant so much more. That, but as you talk about, he was talking about how the fear of never not driving and the uncertainty that left wrist injury had given him to be his first comeback 500 is how he described it. To be really strong and dueling at the front, particularly for long periods of time in that group behind, it was Jack Harvey for a bit, and then in that group behind Ryan Hunter-Reay, he looked perhaps the strongest, and maybe had the 2 RLL cars of Di Francesco and Foster not been ahead of Palou and Ericsson, there would have been more scope for more cars to get involved in that battle. But such was the way it was essentially a 2-horse race for the win, just because of how difficult it was in an already slipstream to get a better slipstream off the car that was essentially third in line but first in the race. And yeah, difficult for Malukas. I mean, maybe a little bit of inexperience as well. You mentioned the Palou pass, the decisive pass with sort of 30 to go to put him in prime spot behind Ericsson when Ericsson came out of the pits. But yeah, a bittersweet day for David Malukas, but I feel like, you know, he's still so young, and I think that's one thing that we've got to remember, that in his third 500 and his first 500 really in stronger machinery than Delcoin Racing could provide him in 2022 and 2023, he will eventually, again, bigger picture, come out satisfied. And I feel like we saw remnants of that in his interview afterwards when he described it as bittersweet. I feel like when the dust settles a little bit, this hopefully, again, a bit like Ericsson, will be a bit of a springboard for him. But at the moment, it stings because third place means nothing.
Anyway, let's go over some of the incidents, because this was a race sort of defined about people having their own sort of problem. But it was also a weird one, because I think maybe for the first time in like ever, we didn't have a car just bin it by themselves on a random lap. Everyone's instance seemed to happen in the pits, or just a multi-car pile-up, or like nobody lost their car midway into a stint, which was slightly peculiar. So it was a bit of a strange 500, I won't lie. Obviously, it was a bit of a choppy start when it came to cautions, but that was sort of the same last year. And obviously, we've got a massive green flag run towards the end of the race. So started off obviously with Scott McLaughlin, who crashed on the pace laps, which was really strange. Obviously, it rained slightly before, which might have meant it was a tiny bit damp in places. But he just got on the throttle and just completely lost it, which was a strange accident, especially for someone with McLaughlin's sort of expertise and experience in ovals. And that was a car who looked one of the favourites to win, which was a huge shock seeing him pulled over. So. And then seeing McLaughlin so anguished on the side of his car was quite a picture. I mean, he was absolutely devastated. You can see why. You can see the tears in his eyes as he was sort of putting up his visor and taking out steering wheel. And obviously, when you put 2 weeks of preparation, not even to see the green flag through sort of your own silly mistake, must be absolutely gut-wrenching. And I think he said on his Instagram post he wouldn't wish this on his own worst enemy, which sort of sees his reaction to it. So. Obviously, I see it in a way that it was obviously complete heartbreak from McLaughlin, and he said it's the worst thing he's ever had to go through in his life. But on the same side of it, he sort of can only blame himself, because it was a really silly error, especially for somebody who was one of the favourites ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't quite believe it, to be honest. I can't even fathom what that feeling must be like. Obviously, all the preparation, knowing that the team put an entire year into building up these cars, that he's already wrecked one car big time in obviously that Fast 12 practice session. And then, I mean, it wasn't even like it was a super high speed thing. I mean, he was just warming his tires. They were not crawling behind the pace car, but they weren't going at any particular speed. So the amount of damage for the speed they were traveling was actually quite substantial. Cold tires, cold track, had been raining. I don't really know what the excuse is. And ultimately, he's made a mistake. He's made a misjudgment. And God, just all of that work, and obviously all of the work as well in the last week to rebuild or to build up that backup car as well. Yeah, I think his interview was telling. He just looked like he had no idea what to say. Obviously said it was the worst moment of his life. And yeah, looking through his helmet initially on the first shot, you could tell he just looked utterly just broken by it, really. And obviously then getting out the car on his haunches. I mean, I use the word brutal a lot throughout the race, and I use it a lot throughout this episode. It was just so brutal for so many people, and McLaughlin's incident kind of set the tone. But just sort of inexplicable moment that was kind of befitting of the slightly bonkers month that we've had.
We aren't going to talk about my pre-race prediction, by the way.
Oh yeah, he's going to win every oval race, right?
Yeah. I mean, we've now got to have an argument end of season whose prediction was worse: my McLaughlin win prediction or your Schwartzman Brumped prediction. So we have a bit of a rivalry cooking here for the end of the season awards. James, you've got to decide currently which one is the worst prediction.
Well, I also had Schwartzman to get bumped, so I'm going to go with you sweeping McLaughlin sweeping both of the ovals, because otherwise I'll look silly as well. But
he might
yeah,
sweep the others, though. If he gets the rest of them, I mean, the Indy 500.
you meant short ovals. You just had that in brackets.
Yeah. I just forgot to mention it on the podcast that week.
Yeah, I mean, I think with McLaughlin, obviously shades of Guerrero in 1992. I mean, I guess at least he didn't crash out from the pole, but I mean, certainly my pre-race favorite. I mean, just because of how strong Team Penske had looked throughout all the race running practice sessions, with his two teammates in 32nd and 33rd, and almost McLaughlin handed a golden ticket of 2 extra positions gained and not being sent to the back because of after his crash in the Fast 12, and then the whole Penske drama. Being able to start from 10th there, I really thought it was going to be McLaughlin's day. I almost couldn't believe my eyes when I saw what had happened, and then you see the onboard, and it's almost even more gut wrenching with what happens. But yeah, it just kind of goes to show just how kind of cruel Indy is, because you can have something go wrong that is your fault or isn't your fault. I mean, it was a silly mistake, but then it was cold, the coldest we've had, I think, certainly since 2013. The coldest we've had, and 1992 with Guerrero going out, that was the coldest 500 in history. It certainly wasn't a warm day like 2021 or 2022, and yeah, it kind of set the tone for what was to come, almost with drivers taking themselves out in peculiar fashion. Every time you hear McLaughlin talking about it, he speaks about driving for Team Penske and driving the Yellow Submarine with so much pride and so much passion, and yeah, just to have that kind of ripped away. I mean, I saw someone saying like you're gonna have to deal with Roger after that, and I was like, yeah, you driving for Team Penske, there is just that bigger expectation as well, and it's just that you felt so bad for him, because just to have your dream like evaporate in an instant before you even see the green flag after 364 days of work from the last time when he was heartbroken to finished 6th. I mean, you only really go away from Indy satisfied if you've crossed the line in first, and that's the beauty of this place. But also, it makes it so treacherous.
It was a galling 8 days for him. I mean, it's a very forgettable Indy 500 campaign for him, but it's a forgettable one that I think he's going to have a hard time forgetting. I mean, until he wins this race, I think that's going to haunt him. Because, yeah, as you say, I know he was in a backup car, but it was a spare speedway car. It wasn't like it was a road course car. He had a proper shot.
But hey, his New York Knicks beat the Indianapolis Pacers from 20 points down yesterday, so it's not an all doom and gloom for McLaughlin. So I'm going to mention this so many times this episode. I mean, that's such a good mood after it, so it's funny. The fun fact, the Pacers are now 0-4 on the same day of the Indianapolis 500. So there's like a little curse going on there. So anyway, we'll move on to when the race actually started. It was on race 5, on lap 5 was when the race actually started. And for the second time in a year, we had a caution straight away. And I've got to say, I've loved 2 years in a row when you see the cars going through turn 2, the camera operator just zooms out and then back into turn 1. You're like, what on earth's going on here? And you see the puff of smoke. 2 years in a row, that's such an awesome shot. So, I mean, I'm sure
it was awesome for James last year.
Yeah, maybe not for James last year. But anyway, the shot itself is absolutely so cool. I love it. But anyway, it was Marco Andretti. So respectfully, I don't think too many people were in absolute floods of tears this year, unlike last year. And look, it wasn't his fault. The DNRs got checked up next to each other, which sent Hunter Ray to Harvey to Andretti. But the way I put this on my post-race grade book when it releases is that you're starting 29th or whatever. You don't need to be a hero. Newgarden, for example, backed off massively and waited for the incidents to happen around him. If you're going 4 wide on the outside of turn 1, well, you're putting yourself in a precarious position already. It's lap 1 of the Indy 500. Just show a little bit of patience. That's the way I put it. Look, it's not his fault at all. But at the same time, it's like you can create your own luck, and trying 4 wide on the outside to turn 1 probably isn't the best idea I've ever seen.
I mean, I saw Marco's onboard, and he got a really good start actually, and just to be on the outside and up alongside the driving rivals was a strong start. But yeah, as you say, I mean, it wasn't really anyone's fault. Like, you can't pin it on the driving rivals either. Hunter Ray had to react and move up. Harvey had to react and move up, and there was just no space for Marco to be there really. And it was very, very familiar to, or very reminiscent of the crash he had last year, in that it just felt like the crash was going on forever. And that, is he going to keep it out of the wall? And then he just has a slight impact that it does enough damage, obviously, to end this day. And I think he called it on social media his Indy 0.5 miles of Indy. I think even that was probably a little bit generous, to be honest. I've got to say, in this, Marcus Armstrong did one of the most ridiculous kind of piece of avoiding action I've ever seen. I mean, he was pretty much like up against Andretti's car and somehow didn't even seem to make contact with it, didn't get any damage. I mean, that was a ridiculous save. But yeah, this was his 20th Indy 500 and not a great start. But as you say, Dan, the other most impressive thing in this was Newgarden. I mean, he didn't come into shot until a few seconds after Andretti had the contact with the wall. Very savvy, experienced move, I thought, to avoid that chaos.
Do we think that maybe could be Marco Andretti's farewell to the 500? Like, how many more do we think he's got in them because of how the team ownership structure has changed and how the influence of his family has been reduced quite significantly in Andretti Global on the IndyCar side? I always wonder, like, when maybe the 98 car doesn't enter the 500, and it'd be such a sad way for that to happen. I mean, if it is this year or if it does happen at some stage, because one of those drivers you feel like Indy hasn't ever really been kind to ever since like his first appearance being not saying mugged by Sam Hornish right at the stripe in 2006, and then from there they just missed out in 2014 as well. It's such a strange incident, and I do always wonder, like with Marco Andretti taking part in Bump Day this year and probably comfortably the slowest of the Andretti cars as well. Just, you know, when might that day come? But yeah, as you talk about Newgarden, he was so far off the back of row 11 as well. He almost it was definitely a preconceived decision to go significantly slower. I mean, maybe seeing what had happened to Ericsson last year and like a strong race car can almost go up in smoke in turn 1 of 800 if you get too greedy. Because I mean, I'm sure he was confident that he had such a strong car underneath him that for Newgarden, just backing off so significantly, it took him a good few seconds to come into shot, but almost it did pay dividends to allow him to kick on through the field eventually as well.
The way I see it is I think the Andretti surname has got such a legacy. Even if the team won't give him a seat, they will find a way to do it somehow just because he burdens that surname and they still want to break the curse some way or other. So I don't think this will be his last one. Will Andretti still want to run 4? I think they probably would do in future years. Maybe they run 3, but I feel like he's got such a dynasty with that surname. Somebody wants to break the curse, and especially after how close he got in 2006, it feels like he will keep trying. I mean, you see Helio still going at 50. So it's like, if Helio's still going at 50, we're going to motivate these guys that they can keep going till 50. So,
I mean, I think Marco's 38 maybe. So if we're going off that, he could have another 10, 15 years in him still. I mean, you're never going to be short on a sponsor either if you're carrying the Andretti name, is the other thing in the Indy 500. So, yeah, I mean, he said on Media Day that he'll stop when he's no longer confident, which indicates that he does still feel confident. But since that pole in 2020, it just doesn't seem to have really delivered. He always seems to have the slowest, or at least one of the slowest cars in that stable. I don't know whether... Because Andretti always seem to have a car that's just off the pace. I know it's kind of a thing across a lot of teams, most dramatically, obviously RLL, but maybe in the other direction, they just have one stupidly fast car. But... yeah, I don't know. I think he still feels confident and didn't show last week any signs of wanting this to be anything close to the last one. So, yeah, I think having an Andretti name is a powerful thing, regardless of kind of the links.
I think we'd know it'd be Andretti's last 500 before the race itself.
Oh, I agree as well. I agree as well. I think that is a very fair point.
Next yellow was the conditions, which was just
well,
rain.
that was one of those. I mean, just on that, it was a very weird kind of situation with the weather, because it was obviously just drizzling and wasn't enough to dampen the track or to necessitate a red flag. But it was a bit frustrating because we had a couple of occasions of kind of yellows either coming out of being extended by like 10 laps just to run until conditions got a bit better. It was frustrating. It just led to quite a kind of stop-start to the race. But this was the one where you had Ed Carpenter racing 1, 2, 3 on the restart, they kind of all went on the same strategy, which I don't think was a great decision, to be honest. Rasmussen obviously ended up finishing 8th, but don't know. I would have split the strategy if I was.
Well, I guess each stand is their own strategy, right? So they're not really
possibly.
I mean, they might be communicating with each other a bit, but they probably run their own strategies.
Well, so the next major thing to happen was Scott Dixon ended up coming in pretty soon after that caution to replace his brakes. So this was kind of just as McLaughlin's incident was unfolding. There was also basically the camera just cut dramatically to Scott Dixon's left rear brake on fire and trailing a lot of smoke. So that was pretty dramatic. And then he started the race. And obviously, I would presume what happened was he had his first pit stop, and coming into pit lane obviously will have then figured that actually brake performance wasn't there. So then they ended up having to do a left rear kind of replacement, which was massive, really, because this was a big contender, Scott Dixon. You could have seen him being there with Palou at the end. And inside the first quarter of the race, he was put 3 laps down and completely out of contention. And I can't imagine anything more agonizing than just lapping the Indy 500, just hoping to pick up points for the championship because of attrition. I mean, I know Herter, I think, spoke about that last year after he had his incident, came back out. It's just an agonizing feeling being out there helpless, knowing you're not going to pick up any positions. So that was major, that.
The thing I'll say about Dixon is I bet he's so relieved he's won a 500, because the amount of terrible luck he's had last 5-10 years, if he was winless but had 6 championships, he'd be so frustrated that every year something went against him. So he's probably really relieved, because several years in a row is just, for whatever reason, something hasn't gone his way for some silly reason. So I think he's going to be so relieved he won that one race 17 years ago.
It's like when you think about, okay, next year there's not going to be another new way you can lose the race, surely. Oh, no, there is. It's just like every conceivable fashion to lose the race, he seems to have done so.
It's like the equivalent of Rahal and his weekly mechanical problem we've never heard of. They just find a new way every time.
I'll tell you what, I thought the Dixon brake fire actually kind of worried me a little bit. It reminded me of, was it James Jakes 5 years ago, where there was a bit of a fire in the front? He kept going and suddenly the whole thing burst into flames. James Davison, 5 years ago, where the whole thing burst into flames. So I was kind of worried that might happen on track before we even went green as well. Fortunately, it didn't. But yeah, I mean, the fact they managed to replace the entire brake duct in less than get him out only comparatively 3 laps down was crazy. But yeah, I mean, he has said before he would trade a number of those championships for a second Indy 500 win. And again, when we look at just the context of Indy, I mean, it's just there is just quite simply nothing like it. And yeah, I mean, I'm not sure he'll be kept up at night too much by missing out on this one, like he will for 2022, where he definitely, he said he had plenty of sleepless nights over that one, wondering almost like, what more do I need to do to win it again? I feel like this one of those where it just kind of passed him by a little bit. I feel like throughout the month we didn't see that much of Dixon, and I don't really know why. Obviously, he qualified on the second row on the inside of it and was kind of up there. But even a lot of the pre-race talk was your Palou and Newgarden and O'Ward. There was not much of around Scott Dixon, and he was my race pick to do it. And I thought that I hadn't seen too many kind of picking him to be there. But yeah, the Speedway found another weird, wonderful and creative way to take Scott Dixon out of the running, which was a shame. But yeah, a very bizarre one.
What I did not like was us being gaslighted that McLaughlin and Dixon had collided. What was that all about?
I don't know how.
They collided when they were 6 positions apart.
I don't know how this became a common kind of thing that people were thinking, okay, Dixon in P4 has somehow hit McLaughlin in P10 2 rows back. Bizarre. But at the next kind of incident talking point in this intervening period before the next caution was actually Colton Herter, who had appeared up in the top 10 after starting down in 29th, and he was pretty sure he was on the right strategy as well. As in like the A strategy with the leaders, which was pretty amazing, especially when you looked at everyone was raving about Newgarden kind of being up there on the brink of the top 10. Herter had actually made just as much, if not more, progress, and then he gets killed basically by a pit speed violation. And it just feels like the story of his season, that he's got blistering pace, he's racing well, and then something just comes and bites him, usually something involving pit lane. And yet again, pit speed violation, and a lot of drivers complaining about kind of brake issues and presumably something similar for Herta. But I saw a radio transmission actually from him in the aftermath of that, and he was complaining about something that had been plaguing him all month that wasn't fixed. So one can only assume that is maybe with the brakes.
Caution number 4 came out because of Arenas VK. Again, a similar pit-in issue. We've seen this a few times now, and he sort of tried to break the pit road. Obviously, his brakes had just completely faded, which naturally happens at Speedway. We've seen this for years, but because they just don't use the brakes at all, the first time you sort of really use them is coming into pit lane. So he went careering at a really high speed into pit lane, hit the wall. BK had actually made really good progress. He was on a slightly peculiar strategy in comparison to people around him, but sort of found himself just outside the top 5, and then came in for his pit stop and made the error by hitting the wall, which was a bit of a shame. But we sort of all knew that Delcoin Racing did not have the machinery behind them to really get a substantial result without some kind of miracle occurring. So,
yeah, this was an actual failure. I mean, you could tell that by just the amount of speed. So he probably, I don't know whether he kind of intentionally sent it into a spin or whether it was sent into a spin anyway, but that was unfortunate. I mean, disastrous month for Coin. All in all, obviously having their 2 cars at the back of the field. It looked like there was some bright sparks. It was going to be a bit like what we've seen from VK a few times this season with a recovery drive, but no, their entire month, given they only had 1 car in the race done before even the halfway mark of the race. So unfortunate. And I think it was at this point, if it wasn't already apparent, especially given what happened underneath this caution, it was very apparent that the race had completely lost its mind by this point. Just anything and everything was happening.
It was a very kind of bizarre set of circumstances I felt when watching pit lane, in that I felt this year more than ever drivers were darting into pit lane really late, and like in terms of where the line comes out, and obviously there's no rule that you have to, like, if about crossing the line, the exit of turn 4, to then come into the pits. But I felt like consistently drivers in the past have been quite come off turn 4 and like easing in, whereas this year I felt people were like really kicking off 4 and then going really hard into pit lane at a really awkward angle. And I mean we saw, I mean, not a crazy amount, but a bigger number of pit speed penalties than we did, I think, last year.
So I'll tell you who got one. So Harvey got 1, Herta got 1, Foster got 2, and that was it. So there were 4 pit speed violations. And
then, well, I mean, VK would have been over the pit speed as well, heading in. But yeah, because Sato also, like, for the very first caution, had another lockup as well. We were under caution going into the pits. I think it was that conditions caution that Sato locked up from the lead. And I was thinking, you know, could that be the same case as well? And it just felt like drivers were really entering pit lane much harder than they had been in previous years, but maybe that's because track position was so paramount that they felt they couldn't get it back once they come out of pit lane.
I must say, before we get into what happened during that VK caution, we missed out on something that was unfolding before that, which was Rossi. That actually happened before VK's incident. So I think Fox are on a commercial break, and it cut to Rossi's onboard and basically the rearwards view, and there was smoke. It transpired that he had a gearbox issue. It was kind of deteriorating very quickly. He was getting quite loose and was told to pit. I think it was actually Palou behind him who was getting soaked by kind of fluid, basically. And Rossi comes into the pits to have the issue evaluated. And then I'm pretty sure completely separately, as they're fueling the car up, fuel just spills all over the car. And kind of a few seconds later, it just ignites in pretty dramatic fashion. Rossi's still in the cockpit. His fueler actually sets on fire. I think his gloves were on fire. So he was seen by the medical centre and released, thank goodness, and showed the fireproof stuff all did its job. But that was a pretty dramatic moment. Again, it was just kind of this major contenders being wiped out, and obviously under that VK caution, we saw Sato have an issue, and then obviously Robert Schwartzman, the pole sitter, as well.
Yeah, it was a bit of a strange start to Schwartzman. We all knew that his fairy tale would sort of come to an end, and he cycled down the order pretty quickly. And then it's a rookie error at Indy, really. Just, I mean, he said he had a failure of some kind, I think, coming into the.
I think he also had a brake failure.
Yeah, and then just sort of hit the left-hand side of the pit wall and took about 3 of his personnel with him, who I think one went off on a stretcher, but they've all been okay since, which is good. But that was a bit of a scary one. Just sort of ran over his own crew members, and Sato just went a bit deep in his pit box. That wasn't too bad, but lost him quite a bit of time there. So this is what we were just sort of losing major contenders in pit lane through just various different issues. And yeah, I mean, Sato did leave the most laps in the end, but he was looking really good out front until that incident there. Schwartzman was quite far down the order, in fairness. He lost quite a lot of positions on his first stop, but Sato being taken out was quite a story because he was running really well until that point. And Rahal had said that the team's cars weren't good in traffic, including Sato's. But Sato, I mean, I know Sato wasn't in traffic, but Sato ran really well at the start. So, you don't quite know what's going to happen otherwise, but he was looking really good until that point. And so led the most laps of anybody in the end, which is a bit surprising.
I think on Schwartzman, I mean, there was obviously there were two ways that people kind of expect he was going to drop down the order. Was first of all, if he gets in traffic, because he hadn't looked particularly great in traffic in practice, and obviously this was his first oval race, so no experience of how traffic on an oval works, especially a super speedway, proper baptism of fire. So phenomenal story, obviously him getting on pole, and I don't think anything that happened in the race takes away from that. But it was always kind of expected that he was going to drop back, and he led the first corner before the caution came out, which was, good on him. And then obviously after that caution dropped a bit like a stone. He was getting past, and then, he wasn't getting back in line in time, and he wasn't getting runs on anyone, and everyone else was getting runs on him, and fell into the clutches of Ericsson, who I think at that point was maybe 5th or 6th. And actually, to be fair to Schwartzman, managed to pull back up on the rear of Rosenqvist. And then he had a slow stop because pit lane was the other kind of place where people felt like he was probably going to end up losing out. They had a slow stop, and that put him out of contention. That put him well down the order, and then just compounded on the next stop when, obviously this transpired to be I think it was a rear brake failure, he said. So, he wiped 3 or 4 of his crew members out. It was a pretty scary moment, but glad that was, everyone was all right. But it was a case he was learning on the fly, and it's probably unfortunate for him that there was enough damage there that he wasn't able to get back out and just do some learning, really. And obviously with Sato then as well, that was a costly mistake from him because, he wasn't even close. I don't know if he had a brake issue, but he wasn't even close to making it into his pit stall. It was an unusually kind of dominant, almost first half of the race from an individual driver, really. He led so much and had a margin at points as well. So
then sort of the last big accident we had as such was Kyle Larson basically having a spin by himself in a restart after quite a clumsy downshift. And then he hit Kevin Simpson, and then Stingray Rob trying to avoid it all, got into the marbles and just hit the wall on the inside. So Rob actually took quite a hefty hit, so it was good that he was all right, because it was a bit of a strange one because he just went into a barrier which nobody ever really ends up in. So he had quite a lot of water on. Kind of got a little bit soaked in him, but it was good that he was all right. Simpson sort of was an unfortunate victim too. It's quite a clumsy error from Larson, and from what we sort of understand, Larson spoke about this yesterday. He's not particularly interested in doing a double again. He wants to do the Indy 500 again, but just the logistics of it are too much. He would have had to leave early anyway, because obviously he got slightly rain delayed, which must be so frustrating. That's happened 2 years in a row. And he sort of said, I can't really be bothered to do this anymore because the logistics are such a hassle. And you can sort of see why, in fairness. But it felt like a really clumsy month for Larson. He crashed twice, if you include the open test. Didn't really seem to have the same speed as he did last year. He wasn't really as composed as it felt like what made him so headline last year. And this felt like a chance, obviously, last year. Now he's done the pit stops, now he's done the restarts. And yeah, just blew it away. And I think it leads us to a more general point on restarts. Everybody was just having to be so aggressive because they knew that was the only time you could overtake. So you'd go 4 or 5 wide on the restart. I think Award said you have to pick a lane and just stand by it. Sometimes you'd make 4 positions, sometimes you lose 4, because it was the only way you had a chance of gaining any positions. So that's why I think, particularly on that restart, was when we saw the most craziness happen, because there was just cars absolutely everywhere. I think Palou was in a sort of kerfuffle where we couldn't quite believe there hadn't been an accident there. And then obviously Larson further back did have an accident. So rather strange, and just a really disappointing month for Larson, I think, because we were expecting so much of him from what he did last year, and he just didn't really have anything.
Yeah, it was like almost like a calamity of errors, but it just felt like nothing was going right for Kyle Larson. In an ideal world, he'd have had a Indy 500 akin to the 2021 one that was over in 2 hours and 37 minutes that had actually started on time at 12:46 p.m. and he'd have been able to zoom off. But for the second time since 2007, 2 years in a row, we've had rain delays, and it's like you've signed a 2-year deal to do the double, and that's what the Indianapolis Motor Speedway gods have been well, not shining down on you because it was raining. They've been pouring the rain down for Kyle Larson. But yeah, it felt like quite an anonymous month. Again, he felt like he could have had more speed in qualifying, he said personally, but I didn't really see much sign of it on Fast Friday. I mean, he just didn't really seem to have that much going for him for Kyle Larson. And then when it started unraveling, he looked exhausted. That was the thing I really kind of changed from this year. And yeah, you talk about his composure. I think he just looked totally exhausted from the whole thing. I mean, the talk about the double, I think this year as well, was that much higher because it hadn't happened last year, and this is the second year of that 2-year like deal that he signed essentially to do it. And yeah, I just think he looked completely drained. And then I saw his interview this morning after the NASCAR Cup Series race in Charlotte, where again he didn't see the checker flag of that one either, and yeah, he just looked completely exhausted. Which a very tough month for Kyle Larson. And I mean, hopefully we see him back at the Indy 500, because I feel like it'd be worth him giving it a real crack without like so many distractions around. But yeah, a disappointing one. And then he tagged Simpson, who I think did just tag Stingray Rob. I don't think Rob lost it. I think there was, I mean, very minor contact between him and Simpson. It was like a little chain reaction, but it was like there was almost 20 cars that you could throw a blanket over for that restart. And I definitely saw Sage Karam, who competed in multiple Indy 500s, tweeting, yeah, I mean, that's kind of what you get with these cars, where Townsend Bell loves the phrase restarts mean opportunity, but it wasn't opportunity, it was the opportunity. And yeah, it was hectic to say the least.
I think Rob said that he could have saved it if they had swept the line upwards, but because they hadn't swept that line, there was literally no grip, hence why he couldn't save it. So that was probably quite unfortunate for Rob there.
Yeah, it was a bit of a brutal month for Larson, really. Obviously, kind of kicked off on the wrong foot with the crash in the test, where he didn't use his tools correctly and kind of pancaked the wall, and then his Fast Friday accident as well. Never really had the speed, didn't really feel confident or comfortable in qualifying, and then yeah, obviously this in the race. I mean, it was clumsy, wasn't it? He got down. I mean, I think he downshifted at the wrong time, and he just got so low down on the track, and it was unfortunate then for Simpson and Rob, who I think both were having fairly solid runs, actually. It was an ugly impact for Rob, so I am glad he was all right. But I think that was maybe 8 retirements by even the halfway mark of the race, which was pretty mad. Yeah, I think this year there seems to have just been more of a realization. I think he seemed a bit deflated maybe, and just a realization that this is a really tough undertaking. You know, he obviously says he can manage it because he does so much racing, and he does race so many times a week in his various things, but it's tough. And I think it's going to be, you're going to feel a bit defeatist when you're trying this big thing that gets so much exposure, and you've got documentary cameras following you around, and on both occasions it falls short. So yeah, it just shows how hard it is as well to complete those 1,100 miles. Obviously, Tony Stewart's still the only driver to do it on the same day. So yeah, unfortunate. It's whether he'll feel motivated to make that U-turn, but I don't think he do. I don't think he will. I feel like Kyle Larson's the sort of guy, when he makes a decision, he'll probably stick to it.
Kyle Busch was offered to do the Indy 500 from what we've seen suggestions of in recent weeks, as was Jenson Button, who turned it down for whatever reason, which is a bit of a shame. Anyway, penultimate caution was for Christian Rasmussen, who decided to have his own little moment on the restart and have a little dance.
I don't think I've ever seen a moment like it.
Yeah. Great save.
He saved it about 14 times. I mean, IndyCar called the caution a bit prematurely, but you sort of had to, a car trying to do its best to throw it in the wall, but Rasmussen somehow didn't.
I don't know what was more impressive, the fact that he actually managed to save it when he was like sliding in about 20 different directions, or the fact that nobody collected him or he collected nobody. Bonkers.
And then we had obviously one on the lap 200 for Noah Siegel. He basically, it wasn't televised, obviously, but he sort of had a bit of a clumsy crash in turn 2. He got onto the apron and it catapulted him to the wall. I think he said it was quite a big fuel save, and it was just trying to get a draft of people, but it just ended up having a really clumsy crash.
It was a long green flag stint, but I think the two major incidents here that we're going to want to unpick really are Joseph Newgarden had a fuel related issue that ended his hopes of the three-peat, and then Ryan Hunter-Reay also ran out of fuel and his fuel line ran dry and couldn't be reprimed. So should we go Newgarden first? Let's talk Newgarden first.
Newgarden had obviously had quite a good recovery. I mean, there was lap 18, we're like, oh, hang on, he's in 8th place here, whatever it was. And then he was sort of running top 5, and you thought, okay, this is really, really, really on here. And then made that penultimate stop, and we saw him again a lap later. Obviously, has had a fuel-related issue, which was a huge shame, because it was a really impressive drive up to then. You feel like if Newgarden was in the battle with 5:10 to go, that would have had just an extra element to that battle. So it was quite a shame in the end, because he'd driven so well until that point to just cycle his way through the field and just pick off when others had issues. But yeah, through no fault of his own, he was taken out of the equation. And that's happened a few times. I mean, not happened a few times, but it happened in qualifying as well to Newgarden, something which effectively wasn't his fault. Meant he got relegated to 33rd. So Newgarden's obviously going to be really frustrated, because I think he drove superbly in the race and then qualifying as well. I thought he was just unfortunate. And Newgarden didn't really put a foot wrong all month and had great pace, but just for several different things was just taken out of his grasp.
Yeah, I mean, it was so strong. I mean, as you say, we thought this is on. Because his objective was to get into the top 10 by lap 100, and he was there by lap 80, and it looked the best. And I mean, almost like a shout out to Rinus VeeKay at this stage, who had his incident on lap 81. But they're like, yeah, Joseph Newgarden's climbed the most positions. He's up 21 places. That's second only to Rinus VeeKay, who's climbed up 22. And there was just no more mention of VeeKay, how well VeeKay had done. But yeah, I mean, it was looking, the stars were aligning nicely for Joseph Newgarden, and the introduction that Fox Sports had done for the Indy 500 covering. I thought the pre-race show was pretty strong. In particular, talking about how badly he wanted to do things that had never been done before. I think was the exact quote. But yeah, it's just disappointing end to such a strange month of May for Team Penske, and finishes of 19th for Will Power, a lap down, with Newgarden and McLaughlin out the race. It's not the Team Penske that we've come to know. I mean, obviously they had a sort of minor blip around the speedway in 2021 and 2022 when they just didn't really seem to be at the races. But yeah, this is definitely the month that's gonna sting the most, I think, for Team Penske, with all the noise around it and the incidents, and then coming out essentially with actually nothing to show for it. It's a real shock, and a shame for Newgarden, who was kind of villainized a bit at driver introductions, which I felt was a little bit unfair, because I mean, for this time especially, nothing to do with him, the Team Penske controversy. But yeah, a shame it ended like that. But no, he can take some heart in what he's achieved over the last 2 years at the place that had kind of been so cruel to him in previous times. But then also that he had been having quite a strong day.
I think he had a phenomenal shot of winning the race if he stayed in it. I think he probably had the best car in the field all month, to be honest, at least in terms of the race car. I think it was a pretty heroic drive, really, to be up there in the top 5 at pretty much half distance on that lead A strategy as well. His crew again won the pit stop competition, the first team to do it back to back since 2016, and that kind of prowess showed as well on race day. He was making up multiple positions in every pit cycle, despite being in the second least favourable pit box, courtesy of their penalties being put to the back of the field. So yeah, that was super impressive. But I've got to say, I think the biggest heartbreak of the entire day had to be Ryan Hunter-Reay. He was on that Marcus Ericsson strategy, probably would have been there in that fight with Palou as well, in an Indy-only team for an Indy-only entry, which had a chassis change after a fire on carb day. They were using the car that they used for pit stop practice, and they were in contention going into the final pit stop to lead and win. Well, they were leading the Indy 500. They were in contention to win the Indy 500 with that car. All they had was a brief shakedown, which was only allowed in-store laps on Saturday. That was all that car had done. And it had Hunter Ray in the lead after starting, in the back few rows, which was just impressive. I mean, just so impressive from everyone involved. Obviously, they put a full year into their Indy car and then their Indy 500 car. And then obviously to have it burnt to a crisp and deemed by Dallara that it couldn't race a couple of days before the race without having any time to use the new car, it's remarkable, really. But it's kind of, again, just galling, brutal, comes into the pits and stalls and screams on the radio of hybrid. They're trying to rock the car. It sounded pretty desperate, but yeah, transpired to be a fuel issue. He ran it out of fuel coming off turn 4 for that last stop. Fuel lines ran dry. They couldn't reprime them, and we were denied what feels like it would have been an all-time great story for an Indy-only team in a pit stop practice car. I think, along with maybe McLaughlin's, this feels like the most brutal moment. I think just the fact that an Indy-only entry has a shot, not just an Indy-only entry for a full-time team, an Indy-only entry for an Indy-only team. I don't know. I just, the fact that Hunter Ray has a 500 doesn't soften the blow on this one for me. I mean, it was heroic in itself, but wow, yeah. Even just thinking about it, wincing. That was so close to an all-time great story.
Cool. Let's go through the running order. Obviously quite a varied one, and we'll briefly touch on some drivers where necessary. So Palou led ahead of Ericsson and Malukas. We haven't touched on Pato O'Ward because he actually had a quite quiet day. Finished 4th in the end. As I briefly touched on earlier, couldn't really get past anybody else. So it was just sort of locked in that position there. But
he seemed to drop back. He seemed to drop back quite a lot early on. Really
bad opening pit stop.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he nearly lost out of the pits, but I think even before then, I think he had a bad restart. Or maybe it was after the pit stop he had a bad restart.
He did after a restart, yeah. So that sort of cost him. As he said, you sort of had to pick a lane. If you're in the wrong lane, you just lose so many positions. So he was ahead of Felix Rosenqvist. We haven't touched on it at all because Rosenqvist didn't really do anything right, but he didn't really do anything wrong. He had a good day. Never felt like he was in contention, but he finished 5th. Very decent.
He's become good at having this sort of result, just generally speaking. And I feel like he's pretty handy at Indy as well.
He's got quite a few top 5s. Yeah, he's never really felt like he's been in contention for the win, but he's got quite a few good results. He was out of Carl Kirkwood, who was the biggest mover. And I'm again, this is my grey book, but Kirkwood was the quickest in no toe times for the first, 2 days of practice. And we were like, okay, this is a good car in qualifying. And then they just didn't have the pace he said, which was a head scratcher. And he obviously had a good race car because he went from 23rd to 6th. If his qualifying pace was as good as we expected, Carl Kirkwood's now suddenly a contender for the Indy 500. So it's a great comeback drive, but you feel like there was more there for Kirkwood, which was he'll be happy with how he drove, but I think he will be underwhelmed with how the month was overall.
He's my driver of the day, Kirkwood. I think, to be honest, I don't feel like it's an overstatement to say he's possibly a top 5 driver at the 500 at the moment in terms of race trim. I think the past time, well, obviously including yesterday as we record, past 3 years, all of his 500s with Andretti, he's kind of been in that lead fight, having not always started up there. I mean, he looks like a possible bet for the win when he ended up upside down in 23. I just feel like he races so well at Indy and just needs a good qualifying car because, yeah, I mean, it looked like he was going to have that and he felt he could have been on for pole. And the fact that faded could have cost him a possible shot at the win here, I think.
As you say, like, been so methodical at gaining his way through the field. He just seemed to be able to make moves where in the train where others couldn't make moves. I felt like every time I was catching a glimpse of a car that had a run, it was always Kirkwood. Which, yeah, and the 2023 incident, I mean, he was essentially running 4th behind Rosenqvist, or 5th behind Rosenqvist, who then hit the wall after being mugged by Newgarden, and that was from the middle of the pack as well. So, yeah, Kirkwood just slowly really putting himself into contention, but he was my biggest disappointment in qualifying. That was the bizarre thing, was that, yeah, the top of the no-toe to then, I mean, 23rd was nowhere near where anyone had Carl Kirkwood for their qualifying. But I mean, maybe you could say Andretti in general, really. Ericsson's slowest of those that went out in the Fast 12 shootout. I mean, only running a 2:31.0, which was considerably slower than what he had actually run the day before. So, yeah, almost a strange month for Kyle Kirkwood. So maybe some head scratching to do, but I think he was quite strong. And then just behind him was Santino Ferrucci, and actually he probably had the radio exchange of the race. Did you catch on to? He was screaming for some tape to go into his side pod. There was obviously some piece of bodywork loose, but they didn't do it at the first stop, and then he almost lost it when they didn't do it, being like, "You need to listen to me and like get some tape into the side pod." It was.
I didn't really
confusing.
understand what it was. Was it some of the wrap of the car that was loose? I didn't quite understand what it was.
He continues his pretty incredible record of finishing a top 10 in every 500 he's ever participated in, and he's now up to 7. So pretty good from Ferrucci. He's pretty handy. Hasn't really been in contention for the win since obviously that 2023 one, but yeah, pretty decent result. Good day for Foyt. We've obviously said about the struggles, so it was a good day for them. Christian Rasmussen was 8th ahead of Christian Lundgaard in 9th. Again, Lundgaard had a puncture in his first stop actually, so recovered somewhat decently.
And Rasmussen as well. That's a career day, and again, a bit of a scruffy month with those couple of spins, but kept it clean. I thought that was a pretty impressive result.
Connor Daly rounds out the top 10, and obviously he was in contention for the first 150 laps. Well, probably more than that, probably close to 165. And then obviously quite late on had that massive tyre issue, which saw him just collapse down the order, forced him to pit. Obviously had to go into a massive fuel save because he had to pit 2 or 3 laps early. And that meant he ended up in 10th, which was really disappointing because Daly is probably one that collectively people really, really want to see win. And he looked really, really strong until that just small tyre issue just took him out of the equation, which, again, just disappointing because he's one where if he wins, Indiana's going to go nuts.
Something must have gone wrong there because he was running off the pace anyway with that lead group in a fuel. They were all in that fuel save. So I'm not sure where a tyre issue kind of came from there. But yeah, obviously that was brutal because he lost a load of positions and then was also put on a mammoth fuel save for his final stint. But I mean, he was in that lead group. He was there with Malukas. He was there with Palou and was keeping pace with them and had the car to fight with them. So that just killed his race. And genuinely, he had the best shot he's ever had. I know he's led laps before, but I feel like he's never had a shot that's been as good as this. And gut wrenching. I think I mean, I don't think there's anyone who doesn't want to see Connor Daly win the Indy 500, especially the fact that he's not won a race before. If he was to win the Indy 500 as his first race. I think it's 1940 the last time an Indiana-born driver won the 500. So I felt like it was on the dream, but got snatched from us.
11th was Takuma Sato, obviously that pit stop issue mentioned earlier, ahead of Callum Ilott and Helio Castro-Neves. Devin DiFrancesco and Louis Foster, 14th and 15th. I know they'll inevitably come up, so because they were the ones in front of Palou and Ericsson. Obviously, it's frustrating, but at the end of the day, they've got to stay there just in case the yellow comes out. So they're doing what they need to do. So obviously, they both ran quite well, particularly DiFrancesco, but he was also on that slightly peculiar strategy. So it meant he cycled to the front of various points, but obviously had to sort of do an extra stop in comparison to the people around him. So that lost him out a bit. Foster obviously still finishing the lead lap despite having 2 pit speed violations, which is pretty impressive actually. So there's probably more potential for him there if he didn't have his pit speed violations.
That's something made me think. I mean, where would he end up if he didn't have those 2 pit speed violations? I mean, one of them was quite early in the race, wasn't it? So it's probably negated, I guess, by caution.
The first one was on lap 61. The second one was on lap 110. So that would have been under green, the second one.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I guess it's an impressive drive, putting them aside then, to still be on the lead lap and finish 15th. Rookie drive. I know he won't get Rookie of the Year, obviously, because of Schwartzman's pole. He will almost certainly pick up Rookie of the Year. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it's anything more than unfortunate, the DiFrancesco and Foster situation, them being in front of the leaders, because they have every right. They're fighting for their positions. They're trying to stay 14th and 15th, which in the kind of view of the wider season for RLL and leaders circle is a big day. There's no reason why they should cede their positions. You know, they're running their own race for a team that has, obviously struggled. And if a caution was to come out, they'd have a chance to fight further up again. So I think it showed more the difficulties passing cars that the leaders couldn't get past cars that were 14th, 15th. But we can't brush over eye a lot. I mean, to finish 12th for Prema, their first ever oval race, is an outstanding result. And if it wasn't for the final stint where I think he had a bit of a tyre issue, he was on for like a top 5, top 6. That was where he was running on pure pace. So having started down in 21st to make that ground up is superb drive. One of the best drives of the day, no doubt.
So 60th was Nolan Siegel, obviously crashing the final lap ahead of Colton Herter, Ed Carpenter, Will Power and Graham Rahal, who were all a lap down for their own reasons. Power was a lap down, but we never quite worked out why. So that's another mystery that needs solving, why Power was a lap down.
He was on the brink of the top 10 as well at points. He looked like he kind of finished in that lower top 10 region. So unsure. And Graham Rahal was like
stops though, so maybe he had a top off or something.
Graham Rahal was alarmingly slow, like almost dangerously slow at points of that race.
On restarts, he was just getting gobbled up left, right, and centre. It was like almost as someone had attached a parachute onto the back or swapped it out for his 2023 car. Like, it was really slow.
It must be mentioned he did have an engine failure or some mechanical issue. I don't know if it was ever confirmed on carb day. So whether that played into it, unsure.
Then it was Armstrong, Harvey, and Dixon who were the last cars running. Hunter Ray Newgarden with the 2 mechanical issues. Then Rob Larson Simpson had their incident. Schwartzman's day ended in the pits, as did Rinus Vika's, as was Alexander Rossi's. Marco Andretti's ended in turn 1, and Scott McLaughlin's ended before it even started. So that was the running order in the end. So I think obviously it's time to briefly reflect on the race in general. We've been going for quite a while, so we won't spend too long on this. But it wasn't as big of a 500 as we've seen in recent years, and obviously the bar for that is relatively high. So we can't expect the same sort of 500 we got last year. But this was the first of the hybrid, and obviously that was always going to be a big test for it. And was the racing any good? I don't really think so. It seems pretty much impossible to overtake outside of restarts, which is why we said people were just going absolute maniac on restarts because they knew there was their only chance to gain any positions. So when you're the 4th, 5th car in the pack, you couldn't overtake, and we saw exactly that because Ericsson should have theoretically been able to absolutely drive past Palou with Palou was saving, and he just couldn't. So it was. I feel it was a bit disappointing because there wasn't really any overtakes bar somebody having an issue or outside of restarts, which is just frustrating because we haven't had a great standard of racing this year. And yes, the 500 is always good, it's always magical, but I don't think the racing itself was particularly good. It was made a decent race because there was just issues for people, particularly on pit road, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it, and I think it's hard not to enjoy a 500 just because of everything that is at stake. I think that just brings a whole level of enjoyment regardless of what the racing's actually like. I think it was a good kind of unpredictable race, but it wasn't vintage. And I think, obviously, especially after last year, there was an awful lot to live up to. I mean, that was one of the best races we've ever seen at Indy. I think it became an intriguing race. I think that's a sort of strategy game. As always, you had those kind of ebbs and flows, the peaks, the troughs that you get at Indy. And I think it was cool to see the likes of Daly, the likes of Malukas up front, Hunter Ray up front. That, you know, I guess that kind of just shows the unpredictability of it. But yeah, I mean, it had that same feel of final 20 laps. You didn't quite know how it was going to play out. Obviously, we got a pass for the lead with 14 to go. But then from that point, it kind of felt like no one was going to be able to make inroads on Palou. I mean, it was a crazy race. I don't think that's down to the actual racing product, but it was pretty befitting, I thought, of what was quite a crazy month. Obviously, we've had inexplicable storylines all month, from rookie pole sitter to the Penske debacle to some of the pretty hefty crashes we saw through, you know, with the qualifying boost. And I mean, it took us about 2 hours, I think, to reach 120 laps. So that was a little bit, I mean, it was bonkers. I think I saw it described as the race being a little bit drunk, to be honest. But yeah, I don't know. Beyond like people losing the race in pretty inconceivable ways, it wasn't great. I think the fact there were less incidents on track was probably because people weren't going for passes because it was just difficult to make passes. That was why we weren't seeing, you know, as you say, Dan, away from restarts. It was, you know, all the incidents we were seeing were fires in pit lane, spins in pit lane, people wiping their crew members out. And yeah, unfortunately, as it got into that kind of long green flag run, it did become that bit more processional, I think, and we weren't seeing that many. Yeah, you had the classic exchanging of positions like we were seeing between Di Francesco and Foster, but Palou was one of very few in that lead pack that were actually making passes work. Again, maybe speaking to, he's nailed this new balance with the hybrid, but I do feel like the weight kind of outweighed the benefit of the boost almost, and we had great conditions with the cooler temperatures. This was supposed to be a great race, and maybe I don't know. It just didn't live up to that. It just didn't live up to that.
I don't think you can call a race great because of people having issues in pit lane. I think you can call a race great because the racing was great and there were good overtakes like there were last year.
Exactly. Yeah, and unfortunately, obviously, I feel like just the temperature was just the thing that people were going on about all week, but it just didn't give what it kind of promised maybe. And I think ultimately that probably does come down to the hybrid. That despite the favourable conditions, like last year with it being a later race, the great conditions, but the cars were lighter. That was why the racing was good. And the thing that's changed this year is the cars are heavier. And on the restarts, I mean, it just felt like there were massive bunches of cars just bundling into corners quite clumsily. I think it was a good race. It just wasn't a vintage race. I'll put it that way.
I mean, the race it reminded me of, which is why I've actually got something out, is the 2018 Indy 500, where, again, similar in that passing was difficult outside of restarts and starts. And there was Indy Split, which is the book that John Oriovitz wrote, of course, about the car IRL split. There's a bit about how about the 2018 Indy 500 itself, talking about how and I feel like it kind of resonates with what we just saw, which was it was generally interesting and entertaining, but it lacked slingshot passing and wheel-to-wheel excitement that has been a hallmark of the event. After 2018, what they did was change the front wings in order to let people come in closer. And actually, the 2019 race is, one of the most exciting I think we could possibly have imagined, but even then had, in that instance, not Palou and Ericsson, Pagenaud and Rossi had two cars in front of them as well. Would they have been able to make it past? It's difficult to tell. And it's almost like an unintended consequence of spec car racing, right? Because artificial parity makes competition closer, but almost too close that it's kind of, it makes it impossible to make moves from the pack, which is, I guess, I think the legacy that we'll take from this 500 is that it was the day that Palou kind of sealed his deal as one of IndyCar's all-time greats. But that's kind of all we'll remember it for. It won't be like we're saying. It's very similar with Will Power's 2018 Indy 500 win, in that it was the day Will Power kind of cemented his Team Penske legacy, but it's not something that we will remember for years to come, like last year or the year before, or even the year before that, or the year before that. Like, these aren't Indy 500s that will make, highlight compilations, but for the driver themselves, that means absolutely nothing.
Yeah, I think that there's work to do to improve the racing ultimately, and maybe that's not going to come until we get a new car that properly
step
fits
number
the hybrid.
one of fixing that is taking out the hybrid, because we're 6 races in, and every race has been not particularly incredible.
But realistically, they're not going to do that. So the only solution with keeping the hybrid is having a new car that actually is built around the hybrid system to fit it. So,
which is what they should have done in the first place.
Exactly. We've got into these weeds before. I don't want to ruin our 500 episode by delving into another hybrid rant. Ultimately, it's been another just remarkable fortnight, really, of just stories that people remember for a long time. The history of a Prema on pole with a rookie both being on debut. Álex Palou cementing his legendary legacy. That's what we'll remember it by. We won't remember it by the hybrid system.
Right, unsung hero. I'm going to fire off today with... I feel like one of you will say Kirkwood, so I'll avoid him, and I'll go for Felix Rosenqvist.
I was going to go for Ryan Hunter-Ray.
So I'll go for Carl Kirkwood, because I think he was the strongest driver of the day with about 4 seconds of television time and ended up finishing the race in 6th. It was a really strong race day. He did a good job.
Top 3 drivers of the day. is very open to interpretation, but I would personally go for third place Malukas, second place Palou, and first place Newgarden.
Guys, this is difficult.
This is the most difficult one we've ever had.
I would probably go Palou, Kirkwood, and Newgarden. I just don't know what order.
I'm gonna go third place for Ericsson. I feel like that 23rd to first was quite crazy, and I couldn't almost believe my eyes, even in kind of a brief celebratory mood. Third place for Ericsson. I'm going second place. I really want to give to Ryan Hunter-Reay because it was so close. Because he was 3 seconds up the road from Ericsson, so he really could have, he actually could have done it. He could have come out ahead of Foster and Di Francesco, and that would have been that. And then first place, I've got to give to Palou. He just is so complete.
This is one of those, I feel like you just can't, but it's very hard to pick three. Like, easily within the three, you could have Palou, Ericsson, Malukas, Kirkwood, Hunter-Reay, Newgarden.
Right, and funniest moment, we've just got 2 weeks, and we briefly touched about last week of O'Ward and not milking the cow. He did milk the cow, which was extremely funny. So that's my funniest moment of the week.
One bizarre thing, I don't know whether you'd call it funny but loads of the drivers were going on about how they really needed the toilet because of the delay and the amount of time they've been sat in the cars for. So I saw an interview that Malukas did with Marshall Pruitt, and he basically just was desperate for the toilet throughout it. But the crown is taken by Marco Andretti's My Indy 0.5 video he posted on Instagram. Alexander Rossi commented to say 0.5 is generous. To which Marco Andretti replied, "Wow, you're on fire today." Obviously referencing the fire in pit lane. I thought that was quite amusing.
I'll give my funniest moment, I guess. Did we see the video that Arrow McLaren, I think, posted with Bubba Watson, the two-time Masters golf champion, of him trying to chip a marshmallow into Kyle Larson's mouth?
Yes,
I quite enjoyed that. Because that was quite good fun. So yeah, I'll give that to my funniest moment of the month of May after what you guys have said. Because I did particularly enjoy some moments from May this time around.
I feel like I'm probably forgetting quite a lot. I thought Rob Gronkowski was very fun in the snake bit on the Fox broadcast. Him also crossing paths with Stingray Rob on the grid for a little interview was something I very much enjoyed as well. I thought it was a phenomenal crossover.
I predicted the tournament. I won't go over who did what, but I'll give you over who got what points. Archie got 3 alongside Morgan because they both predicted Palou first. Myself and Ivan both got 1, and then the fans, James and Tom, got 0. So points as it stands, Archie leads with 23. Quite a gap to me and Tom with 18.
Oh, nice.
Morgan lies next to 15. Fans, you have 14. Ivan's 11. 12, sorry. And James, you are dead last with 11.
The Palou of the predictor tournament, eh?
Maybe. You've got 2, 3, 3, 6, 6, 3. So you've had pretty good run-outs, in fairness, so far. So
no pointless runs yet.
Anyway, me and Archie will come back to you with our top 6 for Detroit because we are back next weekend. So work out top 6 and come back to you for the fastest predictor tournament to make clear the podium and top become 6 drivers. Top 6 for Detroit coming your way shortly. Okay, I'm going to start off Colton Herter.
I'll match you with Colton Herter then.
Carl Kirkwood.
Yep.
Álex Palou.
Yep.
Here's where probably going to be different. I've gone for Ericsson.
I have as well.
Oh, and this is going to happen again, isn't it? McLaughlin.
No, I haven't actually.
Oh, hallelujah. Hallelujah.
Rosenqvist.
Yes.
Yeah. So the different one is Lundgaard.
No, I literally thought this week I'll go for something a bit different. I'll chuck an Ericsson in there. I'll chuck a Rosenqvist in there. And we still got 5 the same.
Well, Rosenqvist, we seem to be quite, he just feels like he's nailed on Fast 6, at least in our minds now in this tournament.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know, I feel like Penske are just going to, they're just not having a good season, are they?
No.
So as Future Dan said a little bit earlier, we did have a bit of news pretty much about 20 minutes after we stopped recording, which was quite annoying. But the news broke out that Marcus Ericsson, Carl Kirkwood and Callum Ilott were effectively disqualified from the race. So I'll read you the IndyCar press release. So during post-race inspection of cars No. 2728, IndyCar discovered modifications to the Dallara Applied Energy Management System covers and cover to AR mounting points of unapproved spaces and parts. According to the IndyCar rulebook, EMS covers must be as used as supplied. Additionally, these modifications provided the capability of enhanced aerodynamic efficiency to both cars. And during IndyCar's routine inspection of the front wing assembly of Premier Racing entry number 90, the car failed to meet the minimum end plate height and location specification. All 3 cars have been reordered to the rear of the field in order of their placement in the unofficial results. Prize money and championship race points earned are relative to the final and official finishing positions. Additionally, each car receives a $100,000 fine, and the team competition managers for the 3 entries have been placed on a 1-race suspension to be served at the next event at the streets of Detroit. So, a bit of a shock news because the 3 drivers who we touched on had quite good races, relatively. Carl Kirkwood had a really inspired recovery drive. Marcus Ericsson was obviously the closest to Álex Palou, and Callum Ilott was running really well until this problem at the end. So, huge shake-ups in the order, which is... yeah, very dramatic news. I mean, it raises the question, what would have happened if Ericsson won? Thank goodness we don't have to go through that palaver because that would be quite something. But a bit of a shame because it seems to be all a scenario that no 3 drivers had any idea about. I mean, Callum Ilott's reaction on Twitter was simply, oh. So, yeah, disappointing news for all 3 who all ran pretty good races in their own right. And IndyCar technical inspection once again comes to the forefront of discussion on this podcast.
I mean, to me, this feels like as big as the Team Penske push to pass saga last year, to be quite honest. I mean, will it get the same coverage? Because obviously with the whole Penske stuff, there's a lot of the accusations of the conflict of interest. So that remains to be seen. Obviously, it's not a race winner disqualified, but the runner-up from the biggest race of the year disqualified is a massive, massive thing. And I've got a few questions, really, that will probably go unanswered. But why is this happening now? Because we've barely ever seen this sort of stuff in IndyCar. And obviously there was the whole Penske debacle last week. And that then raises the question, like, how long has this stuff been going on? I can't imagine this is just something that's new on the Andretti cars. Again, like we thought with the Penske attenuator situation last week. I thought we'd said enough of that word, but I'm going to say it again. But yeah, I mean, like, what else is being missed as well if stuff's only suddenly now being picked up on? I think the Penske situation last week raised genuine concerns about the stringency and the quality of the technical inspection process because things were being missed quite clearly. So, as I say, is there other stuff being missed? I feel like the last week's almost been a little bit of a taint on the series with obviously the Penske stuff, which wasn't cheating, and I'm not going to say either of these things were cheating either because we can't know. But yeah, serious questions. Another one being, why was this not found before the race as well? Why is it being found after the race? And obviously, Dan, the main question, as you say, what would have happened if Ericsson won the race? I think disaster in many ways here has been avoided. In terms of the ramifications of the penalties, I mean, for anyone but Palou, the championship looks so bleak that kind of I feel like it makes no difference. And especially in the picture of the 500, it's pretty much one winner, 32 losers, isn't it?
Well, so, Palou's points gap has been reduced
by 3 points.
2, 3? Ward moves up from 4th to 3rd. 3 points. 3 points closer than we were when we discussed this earlier.
And Kyle Kirkwood's now 150 back. He's dropped 3 places. So he's the big loser. Ericsson was in the top 10 and now he's 20th. So that's quite a big difference. But I think the big difference to obviously what we saw last week with the Penske stuff is this was an actual performance advantage. IndyCar say that there is most probably capability for this to give improvement in aero efficiency. I was watching David Land's kind of video in reaction to this, and a very valid point raised is, did they check the 98 car? They might not have put that through post-race tech because it crashed. The 26 of Colton Herta, he's in a spare car. Is that the reason why whatever this modification is wasn't on his car? So that's just something to ponder. I think the Prema issue is obviously a bit different. I guess that's something like what Connor Daly failed in the opening day of qualifying. Bit of a front wing height miscalculation, and with this being post-race tech as well, and I think Prema said this in their statement, could have been a bit of damage, could have caused that. Unlike Andretti, who have got a clear modification to their car, with Prema, it's different. It could have been something caused by damage. I don't think Prema are appealing, but Andretti are, I think, requesting a review, they said in their own statement. So a load of unanswered questions again. It feels like exactly the same sort of stuff we were going through a week ago.
There's always that old adage in racing that if you aren't cheating, you aren't trying. But I do wonder now, with the Penske attenuator disqualification from qualifying, whether we might start seeing this more consistently, that cars are going to go through much more stringent post-race tech, because it's a really, really bad look for that to happen. So I feel like with what was said to Doug Bowles in that press conference, which we were all at, which was tense to say the least. I mean, Doug had not slept. He was not in the mood for playing any kind of games with journalists that were looking for anything from him. I think with that, he was very kind of clear that other teams had approached him, and lots of different teams had lots of different things that other teams felt weren't right, and that every team was trying to gain some kind of upper hand. I mean, we've obviously seen what happened to Team Penske, but other teams might not have been caught doing it. And so now I feel like they are, Doug and whoever else is making the decisions about what goes through tech, whether that's Chuck, the IndyCar technical officer, or Doug, or if it comes from even higher up than that. I feel like this isn't going to become uncommon. I feel like cars are going to go through much more stringent testing, and yeah, we might see this type of thing continue to unfold, because never have before have really we seen something happen in 2 consecutive weeks that has had such a big ramification on the results. And yeah, I just wonder whether this is something where all the teams who had complained about people modifying their cars that hadn't been caught may now start to get caught as cars go through much more stringent testing, which kind of leads us to wonder, where do we go from here? Because if everyone has been making tweaks, we may end up seeing, races being ratified and changed after 24 hours every time now for the rest of the season. So it's going to be interesting. I think it's such a confusing scenario, in that now we might quite clearly start to see things changing.
But on the flip side, it adds a deterrent to anyone who is potentially floundering the rules. We'll go, okay, hang on, they're being strict about this now, and they're finding out things we didn't think they'd find out. Whatever we're doing dodgy, let's make sure we're not, and pick up if others have some dodgy parts. And as Archie said, thank goodness Marcus Ericsson didn't win, because imagine the fallout that could have happened since then. I mean, it would have been absolutely ridiculous. I mean, having to undrink the milk and unkiss the bricks and ungo to the Pacers games. So yeah, it would have been quite, well, it is already a story, but that would have been one of the biggest stories we've ever had. But I want to quickly reflect on the finishing order, because it's now meant we've got so many drivers who've got career best days. Palou finished rise. Malukas equals his best career result. Rasmussen has his best career result by a mile in 6th. I think Di Francesco must have his best career result in 11th. Championship points-wise, as you alluded to, makes it really, really strange. I mean, it's Palou, O'Ward, Lundgaard. Okay, and O'Ward has now got 3 podiums in 6 races, which is slightly strange to say. Lundgaard's got 3 and 6 as well. So, yeah, it makes the order look quite strange. I mean, Malukas has got 1 top 10 and lies 10th in the standings. So
That's mad.
Some strange results.
Just to add, and Nathan Brown tweeted this, it's 25 years since AJ Foyt Racing have had 2 cars in the top 5 for the Indy 500, as they do now with Malukas and Ferrucci. So that's a bit of a positive shoot on what has been obviously a difficult start to the season for them. What I find bizarre as well, Nolan Siegel finishes 13 despite crashing, behind some drivers who actually saw the checkered flag, ahead of some drivers who actually saw the checkered flag, which is, I mean, that was the case already, but I think it's only been amplified now. He's finished up in 13th. So, yeah, very interesting.
Right, let me run through the updated running order, which is now Palou, Malukas, O'Ward, Rosenquist, and Ferrucci, your top 5. Rasmussen, Lundgaard, Daly, Sato, and Castro Nevers, your top 10. Di Francesco, Foster, Siegel, Herter, Carpenter. Power, Rahal, Armstrong, Harvey, Dixon. Hunter Ray, Newgarden, Robb, Larson, Simpson, Schwartzman, VK. Rossi, Andretti, McLaughlin. And then Ericsson, Kirkwood, and Eilert.
They weren't disqualified like the Penske's were in St. Pete. More that they were moved to the back of the field, which means that Ericsson gets 9 points plus his 4 from qualifying. Kirkwood gets 5, as does Eilert, which is kind of bizarre. It's a weird penalty because if they found technically infringed, then it should be like a flat disqualification with 0 points. So the fact that Ericsson is still emerging with 9 points, more than Newgarden, who still has been classified as 22nd, but did more of the race than plenty of other drivers who crashed behind him, is bizarre.
But they get 5 points, so it's all well and good.
I mean, it moves Ericsson up from 20th to 20th in the standings, and it moves Kirkwood up from 6th to 5th with those 5 points. And Eilert as well, actually, he moves up from 26th to 26th.
Also, since we did the original recording, it's just typical, isn't it? The one time we don't record on a Monday evening and get ahead of the game and record Monday daytime, all the news drops in the evening. But we've also got the news that there is a TV rating of over 7 million for the Indy 500. It's been announced by Fox, which is up 40% from last year on NBC, which was just over 5 million. And it's the best rated Indy 500 since 2008. It's only the third time in 30 years that the Indy 500 has beaten the Daytona 500, and the peak audience was 8.4 million during the closing laps of the race. So 8.4 million eyes on the Indy 500 at its peak is good, and I hope that's the launch pad, because obviously they wavered a bit in the early part of the season. Obviously, St. Pete was really good at the 1.4 million mark, and then it kind of ducked up and down a little bit, and it really felt like May was going to be a big time to really jump on for people to jump on the train and to give IndyCar some momentum to harness. So hopefully they can do that now. I guess that's one benefit of having a race this coming weekend. There's only 5 days until IndyCar's back on track again between the checkered flag and practice in Detroit. So at least it gives hopefully a chance for those viewers to not forget about IndyCar before the next race. If it's a 3-week break again, that probably wouldn't be fantastic news, but I think it's all credit to, how wonderful they made the production look. Some of the honestly fantastic features they did with loads of unique voices. Even Gordon Ramsay appeared at one point, which was very interesting. You had obviously Gronk there, Tom Brady, some massive names, and phenomenal promotional effort. All credit to them, because that's big for IndyCar if they can now really harness that momentum.
Oh, future Archie, Dan, and James. We'll leave it there for you and hand back to the Dan, James, and Archie of the past. So that's the latest news since we finished recording, and fingers crossed we won't have to see you again. So back to the original trio to finish off the episode. No, but anyway, we'll leave it there. To the recap of the 109th running of the Indianapolis 500. We are obviously back next week for Detroit. As crazy as it sounds, me and Archie will have our rant about that next week, about how they go straight from the 500 to Detroit. But believe it or not, the show keeps on rolling. This is where we start getting ridiculously busy. Races come thick and fast. And back in Detroit for the polar opposite of the 500, the greatest spectacle in racing to probably most chaotic spectacle in racing, other than that cars will see in the barriers and likelihood. But anyway, we'll look forward to that very much. Last year was where it started raining, and we had Tristan Vautier in third at one point, and all sorts was going on last year. Colton Herta blew it away about 4 times. Palou ran into Newgarden, which stops the streak of about the top 8 in about 48 races, or whatever the stupid statistic was. So it's crazy. We'll see if we get that again this year. But obviously we have finished recapping sort of the day that made Álex Palou an IndyCar legend, an IndyCar great from by winning the 500, which was always going to come inevitably, you felt, but to do it in his already dominant season really is sort of legacy defining. So Yeah, what a crazy 2 weeks we've had to recap. We're trying our best to bundle it into 90 minutes, but it's always quite difficult because there is so much to talk about. But me and Archie will have several pieces up on the website. My grey book will be out probably same day as releases. Archie's got some features on Álex Palou. We'll have some winners and losers out. There'll be plenty of post-race reaction, and then obviously we'll carry that on into Detroit.
I can't believe I'm still finding the words to do like massive in-depth features on Palou, but I'm managing to do it somehow. So this was one of my favourites as well. This is one of my favourites.
Cool. James, thank you for joining us again. I'm sure we'll see you at some point later this year. I hope you enjoyed. Obviously, have you here for the big episodes, and obviously a lot to discuss on this one.
Well, yeah, it's been a pleasure, and now I've reheard the scores and the doors for the podium challenge. I've got to start just predicting Palou at the top every week because I tried to jinx him and it wasn't working. So
I don't know why we all
at the top every week.
We're being all stupid by not doing that already. Hopefully we're better this week. Obviously, we'll come back to you with scores next week. Maybe a bit more luck at Detroit, and we'll see how that one pans out. I mean, Archie's got the only 9 in history, so maybe he can become the second. Still no complete fast 6s in history. That's something we've got to amend soon, Archie. It's been too long of us doing this for us not have a complete one.
This week's the one.
This week, who's it this week? McLaughlin versus Lundgaard.
McLaughlin versus Lundgaard.
McLaughlin versus Lundgaard. Anyway, that's all we've got time for this week. Obviously, a crazy weekend. We've absolutely loved every 2 weeks in Indianapolis 500. We hope you have too. We hope you've enjoyed listening along to the podcast. But for this time, thanks very much for watching. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.